Welcome to this episode of the Autism Annex podcast. I'm John Andrew Slominski. I first got to know my guest today, Rob Foster, back in 2021 when we did a podcast episode together that aired in June of that year. At 4 years old, Rob and his family were told that he would be severely limited by autism and would probably never speak, read, or connect with other people. He's graciously agreed to share with us a glimpse into how his life has transformed since that point. He's a college graduate, a singer, an actor, a literature buff, and a man with an incredible story to tell. Hi, Rob, and welcome back.
Hey!
How are you?
I am doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. It's been a while.
It has.
Well, I'm really glad that we have a chance to catch up today. We touched on the importance of music in your life the last time we spoke, and it's worth pointing out to listeners who can't see us that the room behind you is absolutely filled with musical instruments.
Yeah, I have a lot of them. Music it's been a huge part of my background, from being in like musical theater to going to school for an acting major, rediscovering my voice away at school. My voice has gotten, I feel like, and I'm saying this with, from a very honest and humble perspective, but it's improved so much in terms of like what I have been able to do. The opera training that, I had when I was in, Dallas, Texas has really paid off. I'm working on one song that is more of a contemporary style, with my voice instructor. It's Good Enough from Little Mix, and it's definitely more of a pop song, but the lyrics to it really, really spoke to me. So I thought, you know what? I want to really explore this song. It's fun. It's exciting to actually be working on something that came out from like that 2000s, 2006, 2007s era, and actually, singing something contemporary with a more traditional style with lyrics that really do feel like something everyone can relate to in some way. It's really empowering, especially with regards of how I relate to it.
So you're a singer, an actor, and a big literature buff, and I want to ask you more about that. And since this is also a podcast devoted largely to autism, it's important to mention that autism is a part of your life as well. Do you have a preference, Rob, for language when it comes to describing yourself in relation to autism? And if so, could you explain that a little bit?
I do, actually. I prefer to be, if I'm going to be identified as someone on the spectrum, I'm going to be very clear. I prefer being someone I do not like being referred to as being autistic. I prefer to actually being referred to as someone who is on the autism spectrum. Part of the reason for that is because while being someone who is spectrum, it's not all there is to my identity. Essentially, I want to be known really as a person first. I look at it almost as form of, say being autistic. That's a characteristic. That's a part of who I am. That is not my whole makeup, though. That's not my whole makeup with who I am. So, usually, and that's how it turns out with conversations. If it comes on to if someone, if we somehow get on the subject, I'll be like, yeah, I'm someone who grew up on the autism spectrum, but it's not something that I advertise first off. It's a part of me, but it's not a complete makeup of who I am. There's a faith background. There's a artistic background. There's just so much more than simply being someone who's been on the spectrum for me.
And as you point out, the ways in which we describe ourselves and the stories we tell about our lives are a very important part of our identity. Things were very different for you, though, as a kid. And I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit more about that period of your life.
When it comes to being on the spectrum, it's not something that everyone notices immediately with me. It's something that some people will pick up on, okay, he seems a little bit aspy or he's a little awkward in some form or fashion, but they don't catch on quick. They do not always catch on quick enough to think, oh, wait, he's spectrum. And part of it is because I was very high functioning. I was diagnosed um, at around the age 3 or 4, I want to say. I was diagnosed at around the age 4, and I was told at a very early age from doctors that I would not be able to speak. They didn't think it was possible. And this was kind of when I was born and when I was first diagnosed was at a very early time when there was, I think it was referred to as kind of being the spectrum epidemic. And it was very new. It was very new, and it was something that I feel like people were kind of just discovering. And, to this day, I think that autism is not something that everyone completely gets or understands fully. And because of that, doctors were saying, your son telling my parents that I wouldn't be able to socialize. I wouldn't be able to make connections. I wouldn't be able to read. There was a whole list of things that I wouldn't be able to do, and it was pretty bad looking. And my parents said essentially, we're going to make this work in some form or fashion. They just wouldn't give up on me. And that's kind of where ABA comes in. The people in ABA would not give up on me either. And as the years went by, that kind of tenacity and, as well, my own tenacity of, you know, changing and just listening and improving. And, it's been an ongoing journey. There's still so much that I can improve on socially and everything.
Where do you think ABA made the biggest impact in your life, either as a kid or as an adult?
My family was told early on. I mean, I was taken to New York at one point with a specialized therapist, and they were saying I was progressing fairly rapidly because of I don't want to call it the ABA background that I was going through. I was progressing very rapidly, and before you knew it, I was reading, and I can't stop reading now. I'm a huge literature fiend now. I've read everything from C.S. Lewis to J.R.R. Tolkien to Jack Kirby, from Marvel Comics to DC Comics. I've read it all. And I'm even right now, I'm working on, because like I said, there's a room for continuous improvement. I'm working on stoicism meditations. So there's so much still out there that I can really improve upon.
It sounds like personal growth is a big theme for you, and the fact that you've turned so many significant corners in your life makes that really evident. How does your tenacity and your commitment to self-improvement play out in your day-to-day life? And how do you balance celebrating your victories with finding new areas for growth?
It's easy, and this is something that I feel anyone can relate to. It's easy, and this is one thing I've discovered in reading Stoicism. It's so easy to think that your past can define your future. And it's easy to look back on those dark moments in your past. And I think part of it is that something I want to say that's just wired into us. We remember the negative experiences because they have such an impact. That's early. I want to say that's something almost primal, remembering those bad experiences to best know how to avoid getting in them again. But because of how stark and how vivid they can be, especially for, someone like me, it's easy to forget about those sharp turns, those corners. And, I have to really on some days think, okay, this is not as if I'm in like a tough situation at work, if I'm at a tough situation in life, it's easy to think this isn't going to work. This is a hopeless situation. But then I'm able to draw from, I've really worked to be able to kind of pull myself out of that negative self-talk and think, okay, there has been so much more to my life that I have conquered than at what I failed at. This is having those sharp turns of coming through all of that has been my primary rock that I've really stood on of, thinking to myself, okay, this is a tough situation that I'm in currently. I've been through so much friggin' worse. I've conquered so much. I've become a voracious reader. I've become a voracious actor. I've improved my social life so much. And that's not to say my social life has continued to be a struggle, but looking back on those things, I think to myself, I can do it. If I really just stay dedicated to really changing, I can do it. But at the same time, it's not something that I feel like you can do always completely on your own. Because, with social life, there's so much more to ourselves that we do not realize is going on. Like I'm not, no one I feel like can be completely self-aware. And, that was kind of where the ABA came in, as I had other people helping with building me into who I am and accomplishing the things that I want to accomplish. I haven't given up on the idea of being someone who can have a family one day and who can actually navigate that and, navigate my relationships in a way in which I can accomplish that. And I just, there are times where in my deepest ruts, I'm like, I don't think I can do that. I don't think I can be someone who can connect with people in a way that would go about creating family. And I'm able to just kind of pull myself out. And I think to myself, yeah, well, you also were someone who no one thought would be able to speak or do half the things that you're doing now. So it's bold to think you can't do this. It doesn't mean it's not going to require work. It doesn't mean that it's not going to require help from others, but it can be accomplished. And that's that past experience of having climbed those mountains. That's been what's kept me hoping. And that's kept what's driving me in continual improvement.
I'd like to go back to something you said earlier, because you framed your experience with ABA in a really interesting way. And I think that underlines much of what we're talking about. As you know, there's a fair amount of controversy surrounding ABA, with some critics suggesting that it forces people to change or to lose important aspects of themselves. In other words, to normalize and fit into a rigid mold. That seems subtractive in a way, but it sounds like your experience with ABA involved building you up and giving you more independence and agency in becoming the person in all kinds of ways that you want to be.
Yeah, what concerning ABA, it's amazing, all I've learned about hearing because I've heard all of that description of it, and I'm kind of like, that was really just not my experience with it. I do not think I would have come nearly as far as I have without it. I had I still remember the names, and I think about the people who were on that ABA team with me. I remember each of their names. I still to this day remember something about each of them that really improved. And for instance, I had one teacher who really stood out to me because she taught me how to play, and she taught me how to play with others and to really use my imagination, learning how to play. And I that was just fundamental. I would not be nearly the artist I am today. I would have not been one of the first of my class in the acting program at Southern Illinois University if it were not for having learned how to play. And in addition to that, there were others who there was the teaching of reading, and that ended up becoming reading was a little bit harder than play was because there was a lot of labor that went into reading. But with, the reinforcements, everything that was used, here I am. What really clicked for me with reading was I had to read something that was worth reading to me. I discovered, funny enough, it definitely was not. I hear stories of how, with boys, how, they put a comic book in front of them and then that's when they discover, reading. That was not my case. I ended up really reading, young, children's novels from Harry Potter to Del Toro Quest, novels that were targeted towards a young audience to get them reading. I remember the author for Del Toro Quest, Emily Rada, I think that was her pen name. I remember hearing recently in an interview with her that she was after the boys who played video games, who were into kind of that fantasy D&D style. She
Hmm.
was determined to get them. So she wrote something that they would want to read. And, once that specifically caught me, I just couldn't stop. I had to keep going. And, here I am now having read, novels that, have really ponderous language like Frank Herbert's Dune to Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. I've even read Victor Hugo, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And there are a lot of novels out there that have that complexity that are hard to stick with that I just haven't been able to put down, and I just eat it up now.
And for a kid, learning to play is critical, of course. And the importance of reading in your life to this day is so clear in how you talk about the books that you love and also how you craft phrases and articulate yourself in conversation. Beyond play and reading, are there any other areas of your life where you feel ABA has had a lasting impact?
Yes, speech, and really learning social cues. Like you said, I've become very, very articulate and how I speak. That was really impactful. And that was something that I feel, learning to figure out to this day, like, kind of going back to the social situations, learning to be articulate, being really clear and precise in conversation, intentions, everything. And the speech side of that has been really very, very impactful. It's something that I do not remember as clearly working with my speech, but the evidence I feel is kind of there, to this day because, again, having, being told I wouldn't be able to speak, and here I am as articulate, clear, and confident in my speech and in my wording as I am now, that goes to say something. One thing that really stood out to me is really learning to put focus, taking focus off of myself and putting focus on the other person, really watching how my speech, how I'm talking with them, picking up on the subtle clues of how I'm affecting them is really important, and something I've really worked on. And that's something I remember when I was a lot younger. I had one acting teacher tell me, she said, Rob, get out of your head. When you're doing this performance, you're thinking about yourself in this performance. You need to take the focus of the performance acting wise. You need to put it onto the other character, the other person. Think about what you're wanting from this other person. Thinking about how you're going to draw what you need from this other person. And the only way you can do that, the only way you can play clear tactics as a performer from getting what you need from the other person is to be focusing on them, to be completely out of your head, out of yourself, and really looking at who's in front of me, the subtle cues, a head turn, everything, nodding, eyes going down, how that is specifically impacting the other person. It's a very calculated process for me, at least. I've become very calculated in it and very focused.
What's so interesting to me, Rob, as we have this conversation, is to hold two things in my mind simultaneously. On the one hand, the stereotype of people on the autism spectrum as being disinterested in connection or empathy or perspective taking. And on the other hand, how deeply invested you are in these very things. And to be frank, I think many people could stand to be more intentional about their empathy, regardless of whether or not they're on the autism spectrum.
It's almost, I get worried to some extent. Like, one of the things that I was worried about, going public with this podcast is wondering if people would think, he's, how do I put it? Thinking that he's not that he might have been misdiagnosed or something like that, because that is something that is so spectrum is the what people believe is an inability to really empathize. And that was one of the things I forgot to mention. That was another thing I was told I would never be able to do. I would never be able to empathize. I'd never be able to um, connect and feel, that kind of connection that empathic connection with others.
Right.
And my empathy is truly one of my greatest strengths because it's what drives a lot of my friendships, has been doing something for others, even in my work, currently being, kind of a proxy manager at work. I I haven't always done the best job at this, but there are moments with even difficult customers, I'll go the extra mile of accommodating them. And, I had actually one coworker, she said, Rob, you're not getting paid to do any of this, you're not, you're helping this person off the clock and you're not getting paid to do that. And I said, that I'm not focused at this moment on the pay in this specific moment. I am, one of my professors at school told me, do something for someone else that you get nothing out of. That's the strange thing about it, is that when I do something for someone else, be it someone I like or someone who I don't initially like, it really is empowering in some way. And again, it takes the focus off of myself, puts it on someone else, and all of a sudden I'm so much less concerned about what's going on in my heart and what's going on in my head. And it's an escape. It's a wonderful escape.
You've talked about how ABA was at least partially responsible for igniting in you what would become a great love of reading as well as speech. As a person who's so deeply and intentionally empathetic, can you trace that aspect of your values to any particular influence in your life?
This is kind of an interesting point, but even related to my ABA, I, at a certain point with that training, started seeing the effect I was having on others, how what certain things I did impacted my family, impacted my teachers. When I started noticing that something I did sent a teacher through the roof with just like, yes, he did it. He did it. You did that perfectly. I was starting to pick up. That's a beautiful moment as I started picking up on the joy I was giving this other person just by doing something that I was like, I want to do that more because it's making that other person happy.
Right.
And I want to keep doing that. So I went the extra mile. And at a certain point, the reinforcers really did become less about what I was getting from it, like a prize, a toy, whatever I was getting from it. It became more and more about making a family member proud, making a teacher proud. It became almost kind of a reward in and of itself. And I didn't fully realize that was what the real reward was. And that was what really was the thing that was starting driving me until really later in my life when I kind of reevaluated it because I spent a lot of years thinking about it and really thinking, okay, what was the changing point? Was it what I got from it, or was it what the inspiration, the joy, all of that, that was that really what was driving it all this time, or eventually became the thing that drove me? And I was that realization when I was like, okay, that's what got me through it, was seeing good people who really were rooting for me, seeing that pay off, seeing them just take joy in that certain change. That was when I had that realization, that was it. That was what got me here, pretty much.
On the subject of connecting with others, you've described a sort of a gulf of perception that I want to ask you more about. On the one hand, as a kid, you and your parents are told that you'd likely never speak or read or connect with other people. On the other hand, you mentioned earlier that at this point in your adult life, you're concerned from time to time that people might not understand or believe that you are, in fact, someone who is on the autism spectrum.
I have, it's been a little bit of everything. I've been overlooked by some people, a lot of people. There are a lot of people that have overlooked me. There have been some people who have been even a bit frightened by me because they don't know how to read me in some social situations. And the one thing that I have noticed that is really I've made the friends that I have made, the friends that I am successful in making are ones who take the time to really look beyond the surface and really take the time to think, okay, there is more to this person than what I'm seeing. And you do have to really, and some, you can't win all of them. It's definitely, I feel like it's varied and maybe a little more than is usual for a good deal of people, but the friendships I have made have been very meaningful. And part of it, in high school, middle school years, more so high school years to early college years were very, very painful years, very painful years of really learning how to grow. And, the social aspect with people has been something that I have been learning to improve to this very day. One of the things that, I've recently really thought about is I've been kind of reflecting on a certain song from, a musical that came out a few years ago called The Greatest Showman. The song in it, This Is Me, I was revisiting it a while back, and I kind of started thinking to myself, why am I not, I don't want to say pretending, that's not the right word. Hiding, masking certain parts of my personality that are spectrum related that I don't want to share. And I've reached a point where I've kind of thought to myself, I don't know if I want to do this. I want to be open to really expressing if it comes up, be it my faith, be it my spectrum related disabilities. I've reached a point where I really kind of decided, and this kind of goes in lines with the lyrics of that song, that there's nothing I'm not worthy of. And, this is me.
What would you say to parents whose child is diagnosed with autism if they are considering ABA? And what advice would you share as someone who has traveled that path?
My message specifically for them would be, I say, get the early intervention, or I say, if you intervene early enough, I say, if you show tenacity, you don't give up hope, believing that your kid can do it, you may be talking to someone like me in the future. That kid may be that. I think that, if I could do it, and it was severe when I was really, really young, you just need to really persevere and you need to really figure out building that connection. And I know it's hard. It's when you look at it, you feel like you're looking at a mountain. I get it. I really do. There have been so many mountains in life that I just, to this day, even, I'm amazed that I overcame, but it doesn't change the fact that I did it. It doesn't change the fact that I'm here now, which means it's not nearly as impossible as it looks. I would say concerning ABA, I say try it. I say try it because of the significant change that it had on my life. And as well, I feel like the moment that your child learns to really realize the effect that child is having on the parent from actually learning and seeing the improvement of, how, like what we talked about earlier, for example, of when I started thinking, okay, this is having an impact on my progress, me succeeding with these tests or certain tasks. When I started realizing the impact it was having on the family around me and the teachers around me, really the kind of the, oh my gosh, she got it.
Right.
And it's, I feel very I'm really trying to be very calculated in this response because there's not a single person on the spectrum that is the same. I cannot completely say that there isn't a formula to it.
Yeah.
There isn't a formula to it. There's not a, you do this, 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 and presto, your kid can do it all. I want to say as well, and this is something I would speak to any kid who has gone through the hurdles of getting to say is, the point of where I'm at is that you have to be patient with yourself and you have to be patient with your child. There's a lot that I still can't do. I'm working management in retail currently when I'd like to be out there being a performer. I'd like to be, acting again. I'd like to be singing again. I'd like to be animating. I'd like to be doing all of these things. I'd like to be writing. I'd like to have all of my, dreams out there. And I'm not there yet. You have to learn to really realizing the blessings that are currently around you at the moment, learning to be content with the present, drawing inspiration from the past, and believing that you can accomplish these things in the future. It's a balance of all three of these things, and learning to be patient with the gradual process it can take to get to that life you want to live or that you want your child to have. My folks have been very patient. I mean, I'm still, believe it or not, I'm still working on getting my license and, getting so much ground under me. You have to learn to just be patient with it. And you, as a parent, have to be patient with your child through that process.
Rob, it has been great reconnecting with you today. I appreciate you sharing your story so freely, and I hope we can continue the conversation sometime soon.
Let's do it again.
You've been listening to my conversation with Rob Foster here on the Autism Annex podcast. I'm John Andrew Slominski. If you like what you hear, please consider sharing the podcast with someone you think would enjoy it too. And be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of our latest episodes. The Autism Annex podcast was created by Star Autism Support. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take good care of yourself and one another.